This morning, we're in Psalm 77, as Ella read for us, and a couple of weeks ago we were in Psalm 97, and Psalm 77 just kind of become some standalone messages, not really part of a series through the summer. On August 9th, so next Sunday Mark's preaching, August 9th, I'll be back and we'll be into the book of Acts again with some really exciting things from Acts chapter 18 and 19, and so I'm really looking forward to jumping in there, but I'm excited about today too, as we spend time in this psalm. You know, the Psalms are a collection of 150 songs or poems, ancient songs or poems that are organized into kind of five what we call books, or five kind of major sections. They're organized in a particular way and somewhat thematically, and there's a whole lot to that we won't get into this morning, but there are various types of psalms or songs. Some of them are songs of praise and of thanksgiving to God for the things that he's done or for how great that he is. There are some psalms that are psalms or songs of lament and of sadness and of complaint and of frustration and sorting through all the emotion of the turmoil of pain and of life that one experiences. And so we kind of have the two perspectives or two ends of the spectrum, as it were, from praise and joy and excitement to complaint and lack of understanding, and how do we deal with this, and God, where are you? We also have psalms of wisdom that are more instruction psalms that give warnings about certain paths in life and a correction or even a push to a proper and a righteous way. There are individual psalms, there are communal psalms, so psalms written from an individual perspective for individuals. Some are written for a collection or a group of people to sing. They're used in various places in worship and times and seasons through the year. And so today we look at Psalm 77, and Psalm 77 is very much an individual psalm. It starts out with an honest openness about what the psalmist is experiencing and doing. And what we discover is that the psalm opens with this sense of desperation. So if you can recall a time in your life, or maybe it's the season you're in now, where you felt desperate for one reason or another, it's a psalm that begins with desperation and really what we might call a crisis of faith. It's really a question of, God, where are you? God, what is going on? God, why won't you answer me? That's the kind of question that the psalmist raises. And I hope this morning, as we make our way through, that we begin to discover the appropriateness of that at times, but also the perspective that comes through that place of crying out to God. And so this is how it begins. It says, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. The thing that gets raised at the very beginning is that the psalmist is looking to God for something. And it's not just kind of a passive looking or a momentary looking. This is a crying out. It is, again, out of a place of desperation, out of perhaps a place of pain. We're not really told what the circumstances or situation is, but it is a looking to God for an answer. And it appears, at least from the first verse, that there's great confidence in the psalmist crying out to God that God will actually give a response to him. And so he's looking to God. God, I'm crying to you, and I know, he writes, all right, he sings, I know God will hear me. But then it kind of takes a turn, and you might kind of wonder what happened to that first verse. Because then he says, in the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. Again, we don't know what the trouble is, but as you read through the psalm, you discover that the trouble is somewhat serious. And it also appears to be unrelenting. It's not momentary. There does not appear to be an end in sight. There's no resolve or answer that at least the psalmist anticipates is going to come quickly, except that he expects God will answer quickly. But the problem or the situation is serious and unrelenting. And he says, in the day of my trouble I seek the Lord, and in the night my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. And so we have this sense of bookends of day and night, a continual, ongoing, there seems to be no relief. And what happens as a result is that his soul refuses to be comforted. Now that's an anguish, isn't it? It's kind of a deep inside type of anguish. It's not just an emotional response to a particular moment. This is an ongoing. He's looking for comfort, but he still hasn't found what he's looking for. And so what does he say? When I remember God, I moan. And the word for moan, you might think of somebody who perhaps is perhaps in pain, or maybe if you've been there, and it's just kind of that, like there's no relief, right? It's that kind of moan. But the word here that's used for moan is actually louder than that. And I say louder because literally it means a commotion or an uproar or perhaps even a rage, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, how quickly we've gone from I cry to God and I'm confident that God is going to answer me to verse 3 when he says, when I think of God, my soul's in a commotion. I'm in an uproar. God, what's happened? Where are you? When I meditate, when I pause to think about God, what does my spirit do? My spirit faints. It is overwhelmed. I am languishing here. It's a place of inactivity where there does not seem to be any kind of progress at all. And then we find this word, perhaps in the scriptures you're looking at, you might find it off to the side or on a next line all by itself. There's a word that says Selah. Now, it's interesting because the word Selah is used 3 different times throughout the psalm. But language scholars, biblical scholars, there's been a lot of suggestion, but there's really a lot of uncertainty about exactly what the word Selah means. But there is a common consensus that the term itself denotes some kind of pause or a breath, or perhaps it's a musical notation that there should be an interlude as if in between verses, right? Maybe there's a guitar solo in there somewhere. I don't know. Who knows? But this is what the Selah means. It means to pause, to take a breath, to stop for a moment. And if you're kind of meditating or slowly reading through this psalm, you might feel like you need to take a breath. God, I believe you're going to answer me too. I am groaning in pain and there's a commotion. And God, my spirit faints and I'm overwhelmed. And let's just take a breath. And then he goes in verse 4, and he writes this, you hold my eyelids open. Anybody ever experienced that before? Last night? How many of you slept so soundly last night like you? Nobody? Oh, a couple? Okay, some of you did. I did not. It was about 7 o'clock, and I was finding myself laying on the couch. And I don't know if I fell asleep on the couch. Carolyn could probably tell you that, but I was no good to anybody after the day. And then about 9 o'clock, I said, I'm just going to go to bed. And I laid in bed with the fan running, hoping that the breeze would be nice on my sunburnt face. And then I don't know how many times I woke up through the night. I just could not rest. I could not sleep well. But that was more... I had a really bad, weird dream too, but all that to say, maybe that's too much information for you, but it's done and it's over with, so let's move on. So what's happened is sometimes you just can't sleep, but the idea of having your eyelids held open here is the idea of I can't get any sleep and I can't get any relief from what I'm experiencing in the crisis that I'm living through. When I'm troubled, I'm so troubled that I can't speak. I find it hard to pray or to talk about. I consider then, so I think back to the days of old and the years long ago. And so if he can't sleep and he can't speak and he can't put into words how he's feeling, what does he do? Well, I start to think about the stories that I read about in the scriptures, about Israel's history and what happened to other people of faith. And I start to think about the years long ago. And he says, I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. So let me think through these things and ponder these things. Then my spirit made a diligent search. So this is no just kind of casual reflection. This is no just kind of naming off events through Israel's history or that you read through the scriptures. This isn't just simply a casual glance over, right before a test or something. I'm just going to make sure that I look again. No, this is a serious reflection. And what he begins to do in his diligent search is to begin to ask a lot of honest questions. And those honest questions actually turn into, as we'll see, rhetorical questions in the end. And so when the psalmist writes, again, and I hear this, he writes that that in the beginning his experience in approaching God is difficult because of times of trouble, and he finds no comfort in it. He's pleading with God, but it seems as if God is not responding. There's a crisis of faith, right? All these things are happening, and so he begins to ask a bunch of questions. That's where his mind turns to. And what are the questions that he asks? Now, this is really interesting. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Isn't that an interesting question? Like, has God's goodness and favor run out? Is it all over with? Is there no more goodness of God for me? We'll sing the song in church, but for me, I'm not so sure, right? Is God still going to show favor to me? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Has God stopped loving me? Maybe that's why this is happening. Maybe that's the crisis because God's love has stopped. Maybe God's promises, are they at an end for all time? He asked the question. Are they no longer valid? Has God fulfilled his promises and there are no longer any promises for me? Are the promises perhaps even never to be made good on by God? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has this been neglected? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? So much so that he has traded that compassion that I so long for. Maybe God's traded that for his anger. Those are the questions that get asked. Questions probably not unlike questions you've asked before. Selah. Another section, another verse, another pause to catch our breath. This is, I'm guessing, a space that many of us have found ourselves in. But for some of us, perhaps, we've never dared to admit it out loud. Why? Well, perhaps, maybe for you, you might think that others might wonder about your commitment to God if you begin to ask these types of questions. You might wonder what other people will say. Maybe they'll say, well, that kind of talk, that's sinful and needs to be repented of. Or maybe somebody might question the level of your faith or whether you even have faith at all. How could you ask those kinds of questions? Why would those be questions that you have? Obviously, those things are not true. Like, how dare you raise those kinds of things? Maybe you've been told that before. Maybe you just think that, most people who have faith are just people who have faith and they never ask these kinds of questions. Maybe that's the kind of space that you grew up being used to and these types of questions were never allowed to ask. Maybe you've had your own crisis of faith where you felt, hey, it's not working. I cried to God hoping he would answer, and I just haven't seemed to experience any kind of response. Maybe it is that I don't have enough faith. Maybe it is that I prayed the wrong way. Maybe I begin to doubt that God actually sees and hears and knows. And this is the very kind of space that we find the psalmist in. And yet we still would begin to wonder in our own lives, are these kinds of questions appropriate? Are these kinds of questions we can raise? Are these the kinds of questions we're even allowed to ask? Because my circumstance and my situation raises all kinds of questions like this. And yet, if you've ever felt like you weren't allowed, what we find right here in the scriptures themselves is someone asking these very questions, wrestling through their own troubles, wrestling through their own experience with God. But then what we discover is a shift in perspective. Because again, the questions, I think, begin as honest reflection, but then as you read the rest of the psalm, you discover that there's at least some progress because they become rhetorical, and you get the reason why I would say that through what happens next. He says this in verse 10. Then I said to myself, so after I've thought about these things carefully, as I've kind of reflected on and meditated on it, as I've asked these questions, I've begun to wrestle through the doubts. He says, then I said, this is what I'm going to appeal to. In an attempt to convince God, I'm going to make an appeal. And he says, I'm going to appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most high. What is that? The past actions and activity of God, not just to my own personal trouble, but to how God has acted that is true to his character from the past. Because when I read about and think about and consider all of those things, they come to bear weight on my present circumstance. And he says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I won't simply give up on those things. No, I'm going to call them to mind. And I'm going to think about all your works. And I'm going to meditate on your mighty deeds. He goes on to say this. He says, your way, O God, is holy. And what God is like our God. So not only do I consider God's actions, but I consider alternatives, and I come up short and empty and say, well, who else is like God? It's kind of like that moment where in the end of John chapter 6, you remember when Jesus has crossed the lake after feeding the 5,000 and the people follow him, and there's a crowd and they say, teacher, when did you get here? And Jesus says, look, I know you're not following me because of things you heard me say or because of the miracle that you saw me do and something shifted in your heart. I know you're here because you want breakfast this morning. And that turns into this conversation where Jesus says, I'm the bread of life. And then because of his claim about who he is, some decide to walk away. And Jesus looks at the 12 who are with him, and what does he say to them? He says, do you want to walk away too? Do you want to walk away from me as well? Because here's an opportunity. You could just, like everybody else, this moment could not be what you were looking for, and you could walk away too. And what does Peter say? Peter says, well, where are we going to go, Jesus? You're the one who has the words of life. Like where else are we going to go that's going to be something better than what we have in you? And so the psalmist says, God, I think about this, and I think about other gods and religion and kind of perspectives, and who's like you? You're the God who works wonders. And although there are many wonders we could point to, you've made known your might among the peoples. You with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and of Joseph. What is he saying? Although there are many wonders that one could recount from the Old Testament and from the stories, and that's exactly where the psalmist is in terms of the chronology of events, or you could look at the many things that God has done. The Exodus is a pivotal event and moment for the nation. Why? Because the Exodus was the time and the place where God came through on his promise to bring freedom to his people from slavery in Egypt. He brought them into a covenant relationship, says, you will be my people and I will be your God. And through all of you, look, I'm going to bless the world through you. And so it's the beginning of a birth of a people and of a nation and of all the great things that God wants to do in and through them. And so the psalmist says, hey, God, you've done these things. And so there's no one like you. No one has done the things you've done. Selah. Pause. Breath. The end of another verse. But it almost feels like the psalmist is breathing a bit easier now. You get that? And then comes these verses to conclude. When the waters saw you, O God. Now, again, the waters is, so whenever you read about the waters or the sea, especially in poetry in the scriptures, the water and the sea are often representative of the chaos of what's going on in the world. They're untamable, they're uncontrollable. And so fishermen on the waters, right? Merchants on the waters, anyone in a boat or a ship, you just know the chaos that can come with that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was, formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and yet the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. It's this picture of, in the chaos of what is there in the beginning, God is sovereign over top of it. And you often see through the scriptures, with different gods, Canaanite gods like Baal and others, like these are gods of the water, and we got to kind of make deals and figure out how we can control things through how we, deal with that. And it's like, no, God is the God of heaven and earth. He's the God over all those things. He is sovereign even over the sea. And so when the sea saw you, when the water saw you, when that which cannot be tamed, that which cannot be controlled, when all of that chaos erupted, When the waters saw you, God, what did the waters do? The waters saw you and they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. This is, again, poetic language to remind us that God is sovereign over not only the seas, but our troubles. But what he's looking at specifically is the moment when the Israelites were encamped along the edge of the Red Sea and without a path away from Pharaoh's army. More on that in just a second. And so he says, when the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. What's that? Lightning, right? And so we have all of this. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth, it trembled and shook. And then he says this, drawing on that specific event of the Exodus. He recalls the crossing. Your way, God, was through the sea. Not over it, not around it, not under it, but through it. God, your way was through the sea. Your path through the great waters, through the chaos, through the circumstance. And your footprints, I love this line, your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. God was present in the moment, even though he was not seen. He was there leading his people, even though there might have been things about the moment and the circumstance which you might not be able to point and say, there was God. There exactly, to look, open your eyes. And then the psalm comes to an abrupt end. And that's it. It finishes. It's unresolved. The psalmist has not tied a pretty bow on the end by providing the resolution to his personal testimony of how God made everything great again by the end of the song, which is what we often hope for, isn't it? I've said this before as an example, but like when you think about like 90s sitcoms, usually the sitcom begins with some kind of issue, there's some kind of dysfunction, something falls apart, and then by the end of the show, everything is put back together again. And things are resolved, and things are happy. But the psalmist doesn't do that. He kind of leaves us hanging, and we're kind of left to wonder, but what happened to your circumstance? You cried to God and you said, God didn't answer me. And then you went through this crisis of faith and you asked lots of questions and you came to some kind of resolution about God and who he is and how he acted in the past. And God's way was through the sea and his footprints were unseen. And then you did. That's it. We're just going to end the song there. You may be seated. Right? Like that is... We're left to wonder how it turned out, but here's what I think. And this is just me, but I think it's on purpose. I think it's left unresolved in some ways on purpose. Not because that person's story is not finished now, but because it's a way of pushing us to reflect and to identify. Kind of like the end of Jonah. When you read the story of Jonah, it's like Jonah go to Nineveh and then he flees the other way and then he gets swallowed by a fish and spit back up and then he goes to Nineveh and he preaches and then he's expecting God to destroy the city. He's sitting on a hill outside the city just waiting for fire to fall, and then God provides a leaf and it gives him some shelter and Jonah's glad about that, and then the next day God provides a worm and it eats the leaf, and then Jonah's like sunburnt like me and he's complaining to God, there's such a strong east wind and it's hot out here and you haven't destroyed the city and all the things, and he's complaining, and God says, hey, shouldn't I be concerned about Nineveh? Shouldn't I be concerned about the people there? And then it ends. In fact, I think it ends with something about, shouldn't I be concerned about the many cattle in Nineveh? It's like what is that? Why are we talking about cows? They're a human life. What about Jonah? This unhappy prophet who's gone to I can't wait for God to destroy the city and this is going to be amazing, and it doesn't happen, and you just wonder, was Jonah cranky the rest of his life? Is that how it ended? Was he just a bitter old man? God never destroyed the city. I went and it didn't happen. But that's kind of how this psalm ends. It's unconclusive. And I think instead of hearing the conclusion of the story, it's the perspective of the psalmist in his trouble that is meant to give us perspective in our own trouble. And so here's my question. What do we often ask God to do in times of trouble? Or maybe more to the point, what do you often ask God to do in times of trouble? Did you cry to the Lord expecting an answer, and maybe it didn't come right away? Did you cry aloud to God hoping for some resolution, and yet it didn't happen in the way that you thought or perhaps felt that it should be, or maybe according to your timeline even? What do you often do when you cry out to God? Do you ask God to simply take it away? The pain, the circumstance, the troublemaker? That's where you pray the imprecatory psalms, oh God, that you would smite my enemies, and all, right? Is that how you pray? Maybe your prayer is that I would be comforted, that I would feel better, that I would not feel anxious. Like when you ask God to help in times of trouble, what is it that you ask for? And when God does not respond in the way perhaps you expect or want or on the timeline you hope, do you simply get discouraged? Do you tend toward unwise actions that actually make the situation worse because you figure, I got to figure out something? Do you become tempted to give up on faith altogether? Maybe this is the moment for me to walk away because it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't what I was told. It wasn't what I expected it would be. And the psalmist who's been there, the psalmist gives us some perspective. His appeal isn't based on his circumstances. What did you notice? His appeal is based on God's character. His appeal begins with God, here's my problem and I want you to fix it. But what does he do? It's not, God, will you see me and do you care about me? And his appeal is, God, it's not see me, but be faithful to who you are. His appeal is, God, I know this is true of your character. God, I know this is how you've acted in the past. God, I know who you are. And so my expectation, God, is that you will be faithful to not see me, but to who you are. And what we know and believe about God determines how we will live. And so maybe the question that we need to be asking isn't so much, God, what is it that you're going to do for me? But God, what is your purpose for me? Not, God, how are you going to meet my expectations and come through in the thing that I want you to come through? But God, what is it that you want to teach me, to show me, to help me as I walk through this to the other side? Again, I mentioned Exodus 14. Let me just read for you how this was. So the Israelite people have been brought out of Egypt. They've been heading, as they started along the north shore toward the Mediterranean and the land of the Philistines, and the scriptures say that God turned them back because he said, well, if the people get there, they'll get discouraged because they'll see armies and they'll be afraid. And so he turned them back, and then he led them kind of south, and it says that, that way it actually says that Pharaoh will see that they appear to be confused, and here's a moment and an opportunity for me to get my chance and to not let them escape. And so he sends his army. And so it says, and here they are down by the water, so literally camping out by the edge of the sea. And it says, and Pharaoh drew near, and the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were greatly afraid, which we would say, of course they were. Okay, let's not be think too highly of ourselves. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. So they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? I bet Moses was feeling really great about his own leadership in that moment. What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? As if it was all Moses' idea. Is not this what we said to you when we were in Egypt? We've said this before. We've been here before, Moses. We even complained to you about this, and you still, and we've gone, and we're in the same space. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. It would have been better. And then Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. And the Lord will fight for you, and you will only have to be silent. They had left by faith, and now there was no way out, and there was only a pillar of cloud and fire between them and the pursuit of the Egyptians. And what did they do? They figured it was all for nothing. They figured all was lost. They figured this is our circumstance, and it is going to be our end. But what happened? What we see is a reminder from not only the psalm today, but from reflecting on that part of the story. We see this reminder that people of old struggled with the same kinds of questions and fears that we struggle with at times. People who stood in the midst of God's glory and presence still ask those questions. And it is a reminder for us that God made a way out for them to walk through. And let me just pull us back to verse 19 again. Your way was what? Through the sea. Your path was through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen. And even though God's footprints are unseen, it does not mean he is not there. And he went ahead of them to bring them through. And I just want to encourage you and remind you today of this, that you can trust God in every part of what you are walking through, not because it's always pleasant, not because it's always what you want, not because you will get immediate answers when you cry for help. Why? Because of who is leading you. You were faithful then. And God, I believe you will be faithful now. Let me pray for you. God, we're grateful that we get to talk about things like this. God, I know for some of us, maybe we grew up thinking that we weren't allowed to ask questions about faith. Maybe even the impression we got from other people sometimes was that they had it all together and they just believed God and everything was good. And yet, God, we see continually, and I know for all of us, if we're honest, we walk through moments and circumstances and situations in life where it's painful and it's hard. And God, there's some times where we, like that father that Jesus encountered, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. God, I believe these things are true about you, but in the moment it's so hard to do that and to trust and to act and to follow. And so God, for the person who finds himself in that tough space this morning, I pray that they would find courage through your word and through who you are and your presence, even though maybe your footprints are unseen, trusting that you are with them through whatever they are going through. And God, for the moments, maybe for some of us, we might not think of something right now. Maybe it's something from our past. Maybe this is for us to hang on to and think about and know, so that when the day comes, then we have some perspective to process it. Wherever this lands for us today, I pray that it gives us courage, that it's helpful as we think about our life and what it means to trust and follow Jesus, that we would not be quick to give up or to turn away because things got hard, but that we'll be faithful to trust and follow you, knowing that in fact you do fulfill your promises, that you will provide a way through. God, I pray that you give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard today and the courage to do it in Christ's name.